Mission to Seafarers. This is our international logo. It's recognized by seafarers around the world. They refer to us as Seamen's Club. And it has been around for as long as we have been around. That's since 1856, when we were officially incorporated in England. The only thing missing in the angel's hands is the Bible. Originally, there was a Bible in there, but over the years, so many seafarers were not confined to the Anglican Church. It has become a multi-faith, multi-denominational ministry. So in recognition of that, the angel is welcoming everyone, just holding her hands out. This presentation is on the effect of COVID-19 on seafarers. I just wanted to ask you to think about this scenario for a second. You go shopping, big shopping mall, Yorkdale. You go in as a customer, you go in as the shopkeeper. So for a moment, let's think about us being the shopkeepers. Go in, open the shop, everything is fine, customers start coming in, and then all of a sudden you get word that there's this crazy virus in the world and all the doors are locked. Everybody has to stay inside them all. The customers are very concerned, of course, as are the shopkeepers, who run around and try to make sure that the customers are okay, that they're comfortable. The food zoo opens up, everybody's getting fed. And then this goes on for days, and then it goes on for weeks, and nobody's allowed out. And finally, all customers are declared to be allowed to go home, but the shopkeepers have to stay on inside the mall. And there's no date given for when they will be allowed out. That is a scenario that nobody's ever had to face before, but it could be. Essential workers. We have declared frontline people, frontline personnel in hospitals, all first responders, grocery stores, PSWs, on and on and on. As essential workers. Clapping for essential workers on suburban streets cannot be heard at sea, where hundreds of thousands of crew members continue to this day to be stranded on ships they can't leave, risking their lives to put food and other goods on our tables, in our stores. Our complex global supply system would grind to a halt without them in literally days. As merchant ships transport about 90% of global trade by volume, from food and medical goods to energy and raw materials. In 2018, world seaborne trade volumes rose to an all-time high of 11 billion tons. But as the pandemic continues, the mental health and safety of crews are under threat, imperiling the global economic recovery from COVID-19, according to a growing swell of leaders and organizations, including the World Economic Forum. Some of you may have read recently an article that appeared in the New York Times and the Globe and Mail regarding the IMO asking countries to declare seafarers as essential workers. I don't know how many have. I know Canada has, but I don't believe the United States has. The biggest threats to seafarers are fear and despair, isolation, and loneliness. And this is pretty much a picture of what they look like. Surrounded by ice, you can't get to them and they can't get to us. It's pretty desolate. The effects of COVID and isolation on us. Separation from the people we love for extended periods of time. How many stories have we heard about that? Job anxiety. How many people working in small shops, for example, have had their jobs suspended and no idea when they will be back? Restaurant owners, salons, and on and on and on. Isolation. We're told to stay home. We're told to stay away from each other. We are told to keep our groups of family only inside the house. For those of us who are single and live alone, we are allowed to be with one other person on occasions. We've all been asked to not gather at Christmas. Loss of income. There are many people who are being able to access funds that the government has made available. There are as many people who cannot, for many reasons, access this emergency fund. Loss of home as well. That's a possibility. When you lose your income, you might lose your home as well. So these are the effects that we feel: job insecurity and fear. Fear about everything. That's what the seafarers wake up with every single day, and with nobody they can really talk to about this. Fear for them, loss of work, inability to support their families at home. Expressing fear to somebody on their ship might result in losing future work or being blackballed. Getting sick could result in being blackballed by a crewing agency, so they're afraid to tell people that they're sick. Working in spite of being sick because they fear they're losing their job. Fear of transmitting their disease, whatever that might be, to family or friends or colleagues. Lack of communication from shipping companies. Their own companies don't always give them up-to-date information about what is happening in the world. It is a very frightening time for them, and they don't have the information they need. Worse, fear of never getting home. Fear of never seeing their families again. Fear of dying from COVID, or worse, from suicide, which is actually the bigger fear for seafarers than the fear of catching COVID. They're at sea, they're on ships isolated for weeks at a time. They don't get to come ashore. They're not even near the shore because they're in transit. And if they have no hope, that is what leads to suicide. The Ruby Princess is a perfect example of that. The Ruby Princess came alongside in Southern Australia, New South Wales. All 2,700 passengers, mostly Australian, were allowed to disembark in March. At the time, 100 of them were unwell. Later, at least 900 former passengers tested positive and 28 of them died. But the 1,100 crew members were kept on board, and they feared for their lives. Out of fear of local transmission, New South Wales authorities wouldn't allow crew to disembark from Ruby Princess, as they would have needed to stay in local accommodation for a few days while waiting for charter flights to return some of them home to the Philippines. So the New South Wales authorities refused to make available hotel or other accommodation, dormitory, anything that was private and secure, and instead left them on board the ship. There was a charter flight that returned 370 of them to the Philippines. It was organized by Carnival Australia, the owner of the Ruby Princess. The Ruby Princess eventually left Australia for the Philippines with 500 crew on board, because somebody has to sail the vessel. But 500 crew were left on board. And when they arrived at the Philippines, now 500 Filipino crew were on board. There were others, but they decided to sail to the Philippines because that was the fastest way to get everybody home. They could not get a charter flight. But in their wisdom, the Filipino government left these vessels for weeks at anchor in Manila Bay. It was shocking to see how many ships were there. The Australia government handling of the Ruby Princess is now the subject of a criminal investigation and a special commission of inquiry. The passengers, everybody was worried about. Nobody talked about the crew. The Diamond Princess is another example. It was even more shocking. This was the first instance of COVID-19 transmission. If you will recall, there was one passenger from China who disembarked in Hong Kong, and he had been, he was not diagnosed with COVID right away, but he is considered passenger number one. The captain, Gennaro Arma, had a long history with the Diamond Princess. He'd been on board when she was launched. He was on her inaugural voyage, not as the captain, but as one of the senior management team on board, senior officers on board. After 25 years at sea, he had faced his most arduous trial yet, white knuckling the Diamond Princess's helm against Typhoon Fashai. He accepted the sea's hierarchy. You can't beat Mother Nature, but you can come to a compromise. So he negotiated all night and he kept the ship afloat. There was no accident. He was able to manage the ship and kept it from banging into some other vessel or capsizing because of his skill with the vessel. However, he says, we got through Fashai, we'll get through this, the staff captain told him, but Captain Arma said he preferred the storm. The new coronavirus was something he did not know how to navigate. And as we all know, the luxury ship proved to be a microcosm of the world's battle with the novel coronavirus. The laggard response, it took ages for people to be able to make a decision. Either the government of the government of Japan in Yokohama and the company itself, in addition to the people who were the staff on board, the upstairs, downstairs inequality, the limitations of privilege against a pandemic, and how global interconnection allowed the virus to take over. Remembering that the crew are in little tiny cabins, 6 by 9 feet, below decks. They share a cabin, and every 2 cabins shares a bathroom. Housekeeping and food workers largely come from the Philippines on many cruise ships. Philippines, Indonesia, and India, and most slept below the waterline in very cramped cabins. The crew was barred from speaking to the media without approval, and although one crew member interviewed said he was not saying anything wrong, just the truth, he asked not to be identified, only as Asian staff, because he was afraid of being blacklisted for future jobs. They're trying to get the message out, but the company didn't want that. This particular shot is of several passengers on their cabin balconies. Some of them, as you can see, are wearing masks. The other side of the balcony, they're not. They did not leave the original passenger on Diamond Princess did not leave the virus when he left the ship. He left the virus on board. He took himself off. Within days of arriving in Yokohama, the quarantine ship had 65 new cases. And here, passengers with ocean-facing rooms stand on their balconies, and they're just looking out at the dock, because nobody was allowed in and nobody was allowed off. As you can see in this shot, there's a long wall that's been set up to interfere with the passengers getting on, or anybody getting off, or any curious people looking on. The Seafarers kept all the services going while they were being exposed to the virus themselves. Throughout the quarantine, workers were required to cook and deliver food and linens to cabin-bound passengers, increasing their own chances of exposure. Laundry had to be done, dishes had to be done, beds had to be made. All of this happened because the crew continued to work. At one point, passengers were allowed to move freely around the ship, go to Zumba classes, swim in the pool, attend the buffet, whatever. The crew, on the other hand, were very limited in what they could do above decks. That was work, and below decks was try to keep everything clean and going forward. The company, Princess Cruises Chief Medical Officer Grant Tarling, sent letters to the crew members signed "Yours in Health." And one of them read, "What is happening is unprecedented, but it is allowing health experts to learn about the virus and how it spreads. Jesus. This will keep all of you on board, as well as people around the world." In short, the crew became the guinea pigs for viral transmission for the entire world. I don't know if you'll remember that particular time. I was absolutely frantic because it was like an incubator, and every day the count went up. How many people were sick? How many people were sick? There were Canadians on board. They were trying frantically to get Canadians out of China, off of this ship, getting people to come back home, but making them guinea pigs for the entire world. It takes your breath away. It really, truly does. From the crew's perspective, these are some messages that were picked up from different social medias. TV news, social media, WhatsApp, all coronavirus. We were getting scared, 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 one crew member said. Like, why are they trapping us in the ship? Trapping us in the ship. Emails, Facebook pages, Twitter, any form of social media was used by crew members to get their message out that they were panicking and needed help. Eva Lee, an infectious disease specialist at the Georgia Institute of Technology, sent an email to health experts and government officials who were tracking the virus's spread. She called the diamond a, quote, quarantine nightmare with missing opportunities and missteps, especially with regard to testing. Remember in the beginning, in March and April, testing was, how do we get tested for this? Why do we get tested? When do we get tested? The Diamond's crew, after several weeks of going through this, was starting to lose its composure. A crew member flung his ship access card from a deck onto the pier below in what the company called an act of rebellion. I would suggest you it was an act of more than sheer frustration, but terror. A group of workers from India posted a video to Facebook pleading for their Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, to evacuate them. Please save us from this swamp, the letter read. 3 days later, a 24-year-old security officer named Sonali Thakar appeared on CNN saying she had a cough and fever and had been isolated but not tested. A Japanese vice minister of health conceded to the network that treatment between passengers and crew is not all equal. The Filipino cook admired the Indian crew members for speaking out. This is her quote, "They have balls, unlike us. We are silenced by our fears of losing our jobs." We will take questions. I'll take any questions at the end, but just a note here to let you know that approximately 47.9% of all seafarers are Filipino, 47.9. The next highest group all come from a similar area: Myanmar, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and Indonesia. It is a huge group, and they were desperate to get help, and they were not getting the help or the attention they needed. And then the passengers left the Diamond, but the crew stayed on board. Starting in 4 days after many weeks, the rest of the passengers would disembark. There were several passengers taken off in Yokohama because they were seriously ill, but the workers would have to remain on board for another 14 days because they had worked and roamed the ship during the passenger quarantine. They'd continued to be exposed and needed a formal isolation period themselves. What I should have put in at the beginning of that was this. The passengers were allowed to roam the ship for a couple of weeks, just to keep them busy, to keep them occupied, until the decision was made that that was probably not a good idea, as the passenger virus count started to soar, with not just dozens, but hundreds of passengers becoming ill with the virus, testing for positive. They were all then told to isolate in their cabins, which is that picture you saw of them waving to people off of their balconies. The crew, however, had to continue working. They did not stop working. So now they're being told after the passengers leave, they have to stay on another 14 days and isolate because they had been exposed. Well, how else were things going to happen? And as Alex, one of the crew members, says, so much for everyone being in the same boat. That was the lowest moment for us. Can you imagine? The ship is at dock. Nobody can get off. Oh, yes, we're going to let all the passengers get off now. All the customers who paid to be here, they get to go home now. You guys who are working get to stay. And we'll let you know in 14 days whether or not you can get off the ship. Medical experts were calling the Japanese response to the Diamond Princess and to the crew a disaster. As the number of passengers on board dwindled, desperation grew among crew members. 10 Indonesian workers released a video to a news network pleading for an evacuation, as the group of Indian staffers had done 10 days earlier when they videoed Prime Minister Modi. "Dear President Jokowi, we are on the Diamond Princess in Yokohama, and we're afraid that we're being killed slowly," they wrote. Fantio, the cook, tweeted an urgent note. "Every day, the gravity of the situation only gets worse. We don't know where the virus really is. but we know it's all over. With all due respect to our company, we appreciate all the efforts keeping us high in hopes. But right now, all we need is to get all the external support needed. The company was sending them messages saying, you know, you're great, you're wonderful, hang in there. But nobody was actually doing anything for these people. And the last word on the cruise, and remember that these are only 2 cruise ships. There were many cruise ships, and within weeks, they all stopped. Every cruise ship came ashore. Turns out Carnival Cruise Line, parent company of the Diamond Princess, said the ships make excellent hospitals, cleaning and meals, courtesy of the crew. I don't think, as I read that statement, there is anything more hurtful to have read. Cleaning and cruise meals, courtesy of the crew. The crew were taking care of the ship and the passengers. Who was taking care of the crew? Nobody. Of course, the results, massive job losses from the cruise sector. The Filipino cook on the Diamond Princess thought the Japanese government had done the best it could, but she's struggling. The 2 months' wages that Princess paid the Diamond crew because sailings were canceled falls short of covering her expenses while the industry continues, in the most part, to be on pause. We all risked our lives, but that's the decision. We can't do anything. We're helpless. And as she had said earlier, they're afraid to lose their jobs and they're afraid to be seen as a rebel. So they're terrified they will never get another job, even though the industry is literally ground to a halt. Alex told the reporter that whatever indignities happened on the Diamond, he's broke and has no option but to sign up for the next cruise that will have them. Fear is not going to keep them from working. The worldwide economic impact of the cruise industry in particular. Cruise industry generates over 150 billion US dollars in worldwide economic activity and supports nearly 1.2 million jobs. That's just the cruise industry. There's seafaring, fishermen, and there's commercial shipping as well, cargo shipping throughout the world. And those are additional jobs, approximately the same amount of money. Every 1% drop in cruising that occurs worldwide results in a drop of 9,100 lost jobs. 1%, 9,100 lost jobs. And each day of the suspension results in the loss of up to 2,500 jobs worldwide. From mid-March, when the suspension of cruise operations began, through the end of September, the worldwide impact will be a loss of $50 billion US in economic activity, 334,000 jobs, and 15 billion US in wages. And the thoughts of a cruise ship captain, another cruise ship, unidentified, and the captain is not identified in this article either. And he writes in the article, it is odd that while ports are refusing to welcome seafarers and denying them shore leave, visitors are allowed to board the same vessels without precautions or standard operating procedures to prevent COVID-19 infections. This aspect reveals a lack of concern. Seafarers face a much higher risk from COVID-19 infections since access to medical facilities is extremely limited to them. Allowing at-risk visitors to board vessels without following COVID-19 SOPs is dangerous. Seafarers should be admitted into ports for much needed shore leave or for medical support following COVID-19 SOPs. Canada is currently one of the few countries that will allow shore leave, but it is determined as well by the conditions in the ports they are in. For example, pretty much everybody except Hamilton at this moment are either in a red zone or in lockdown. Toronto is in lockdown. Seafarers may not get off their vessels, except for medical treatment. They will be allowed to go to doctors, dentists, hospitals, but they will not be allowed to go wandering around willy-nilly. They are to be accompanied at all times by a member of the Mission Seafarers or other seafarer welfare facility operators throughout the country. There are probably about 25 different stations. Mission Seafarers has 9, 10, 11 of them. So the rest of the world does not operate this way. They are not always, as I said earlier, have been named key workers. They are not given the medical care they need, and ships don't carry doctors except for cruise ships. Commercial cargo vessels do not carry medical staff, and certainly seafarers on fishing vessels do not have direct access to medical assistance. This young lady is standing in the lounge of a Holland America cruise ship. She's a Canadian, and her name is Melinda Mann. She's on board the Holland America Koningsdam youth program. She took that picture on April 28th. The empty deck on board the Koningsdam off the coast of Ensenada, Mexico. She was a youth program manager, and she had been in April stuck for 50 days. And the cruise ship companies were negotiating terms to disembark the crew and the passengers. It did not happen for quite a while. And this young lady is pointing to the vessel she is about to board, not knowing that within very few days she would be unable to get off. Her name is Carolina Vasquez. She is also Canadian of South American. She's Chilean. She's writing a tender to get on board the Greg Mortimer, a ship that is operated by the Australian firm Aurora Expedition and owned by Miami Company. She was stuck in a cruise cabin with no windows and COVID-19. It was floating off the coast of Uruguay. She and tens of thousands of other crew members worldwide from the Greg Mortimer Company had been confined to cabins for weeks after governments and cruise lines were negotiating getting them off these ships. But I think the problem was they were confined to quarters, and they weren't being a problem to anybody off the ship. They were only a problem to themselves. So quite frankly, cruise lines and governments dragged their feet about getting these folks the care they needed and getting them off. They were ill, but they weren't dying and they weren't dead. So the problem was, why move them? Let's just leave them there and we'll figure this out later. On the worst night of her encounter with COVID-19, the Chilean woman, a line cook on the ship, summoned the strength to take a cold shower, fearing the worst, losing consciousness while being isolated from others. Would somebody find her in time? If she did pass out, could she get help? Would anybody care? Everybody's told they can't see each other or connect with each other. So who would even know she had hurt herself, fallen, passed out, or potentially died? I checked at the end of May, she was still on board. The problems facing seafarers. 73.6% of seafarers reported their greatest fear was lack of crew change and repatriation. What happened immediately after countries went into lockdown? Airlines stopped working. Borders got closed. People were not being given the opportunity to go home because they couldn't get home. That is why many companies and governments chartered flights to get people back to their respective countries. These people were on board ship, which is transportation. Well, why don't we just sail the ship to get home? But you've got people from 9 or 10 countries who are stuck on board. Where do you go? How do you get there? And as we found out when they got to Manila Bay, where the majority of the crew was from, their government wouldn't let them off. They forced them to stay on board for 30 days of quarantine. Oh, and maybe we'll make that 45. And then they made it unending. If they left the ship, the crews were worried that they may not be able to return. They were terrified that if they left, would they be allowed to go back on another ship? Because now they've been in the public domain, they've been exposed to the virus on shore. If they board the ship, will they be able to leave it? If they get off the ship, will they be able to come back? Their job security. How would their families survive without them? And what if they died of COVID? There was one seafarer that I have heard of that died early on, and he died in the Bahamas, and he was from India, and his wife was trying desperately to get his remains sent home, and under COVID protocol, he had to be cremated immediately, and she was never going to get his remains. Our inability to be with our loved ones in their last moments because of hospital protocols around COVID is horrible. I cannot, in my wildest dreams, imagine not getting my loved ones' remains returned to me for a proper burial because of this. And this was a young man with a young family. Ship and shore interactions, lack of shore leave in many countries is leaving seafarers with serious mental health issues. Ships are required to be in lockdown in many countries when they arrive. So while the goods get off the ship, the cargo is deployed, the people are not. I know in one instance in Canada, there was a crew from Myanmar who had been all back and forth from Canada to Europe and different places in Europe and then back to Canada. And every time they went to a different city, they were told, you will be able to go home from X, Y, Z. Finally, they got to Montreal. And a group of folks from what is now the National Seafarers Welfare Board in Canada made sure that we negotiated with the help of Transport Canada with the government of South Korea, where the crew could fly via to get home to Myanmar from Canada. There are some visa requirements and there's flight schedules and all kinds of ridiculous things, but we were able to get them home finally. And some of them were in serious mental health condition, but that was the best we could do. Problems on board, lack of communication between the company and crew. As I've stated earlier, the company's not giving them information because they don't have information to give, or they don't know what information to give. Communication between officers and crew because company isn't giving the officers the information, or the officers are afraid to give the crew the information. Between the agents in different cities and the crew. Some agents say, oh yeah, you can get off the vessel here, no problem. You can go shopping, you do whatever you want, but that's not actually true. Exhaustion, extra shifts, accident, anxiety, depression, and suicide. There are ships that are within sight of land and the crews are still, to this day, unable to get off the vessel. One young lady, sadly, looking over Bridgetown, Barbados, committed suicide from her cabin. They were allowing the crews to actually take over passenger cabins so that they could be brought above the sea line, the water line. But she was not allowed off the vessel. They'd been quarantined for weeks and weeks and weeks. And she was 28 and she committed suicide. Emotion runs high among the crew, as you might imagine, when information is missing or unclear. So what are the supports that we are giving seafarers? And how do they feel about it? 50% of seafarers claim the company is their greatest source of support. 50% claim their family is the biggest source of support. Yet another survey said 76% claim the company is not a source of either support or information. It's necessary for us to establish clear policies for shipping companies and for governments to establish clear policies on shore leave, medical care, shopping, etc. The perception of seafarers as plague spreaders. Read a fascinating story about the Black Plague in the 14th century when a ship came from Europe to Genoa, and everybody was so happy to see the ship had sailed safely home, and they all rushed to meet the ship and everybody was hugging and kissing, and within days half the population was dead from the Black Plague because it was the seafarers who had brought it to Genoa, and that was the beginning. Seafarers are not plague spreaders. They are not the cause of the disease. It did not start on board a ship. It is not carried on a ship by seafarers. Seafarers are, generally speaking, quarantining for weeks before they get to their ports, between ports. They are far more vulnerable to the virus because of us than we are vulnerable to them. Our teams in every port are extremely careful about PPE and being correctly dressed every time they go on board. We're not even allowed past the foot of the gangway. And in some cases, when we are now delivering Christmas bags among all the other shopping that we are doing, we leave it at the foot of the gangway and we step away. They come down the gangway, pick it up. We all wave to each other with our masks on, and that's the end of it. Ship to shore interactions. Ships do not all have Wi-Fi, or should I say, they all have Wi-Fi, but it is not available to the crew. It is extremely expensive. They're given options of how much and how often they can have access to Wi-Fi. But again, it's very, very expensive. So they limit the amount of time that they can have that access. Where do they get free access? All the seafarers welfare facilities, missions around the country and around the world offer them free access. But if they can't get to the mission, they can't get free access. So putting Wi-Fi in ports is also extremely expensive. So there are not very many ports where they have access when they come alongside to the various terminals to get online. It's very difficult. So communicating with their families, which is #1 priority for them, can't always happen. Other issues: medical care for individual seafarers at risk. They have to wait to get ashore. We had an instance last week, actually, on a ship in one of our ports in southern Ontario. Seafarer was not feeling well, and he described the symptoms to Dan. Dan gave me a call and said, "What do we do?" And I said, "Well, he's got to go to the hospital. He's got to get assessed. Has he had a test?" Well, apparently they called Telehealth Ontario and they said, "Oh, it doesn't sound like COVID to us." Well, but he had other symptoms. Anybody that gives me the symptom of dizziness and headaches and nausea at the same time, I panic about. So I contacted the harbor master. We contacted the agent. The agent said, "Well, it's up to him to ask the captain." Thankfully, we had received a copy of communication between the seafarer and the captain and forwarded that to the harbor master, who forwarded it to Transport Canada, who immediately got in touch with the captain and said, "We understand you have a sick seafarer on board. What are you doing about it?" Excuse me. And the captain was forced by dint of circumstances to get help for the seafarer. Ship apparently was leaving the next day. The seafarer went to emerge and was assessed. He was given medication, and it was not COVID. He had a test and was allowed to get back on the ship, but the ship did not sail immediately in the morning. So we intervene where we can. The mission staff and personnel intervene where we can, because we take every symptom very seriously. Mental health considerations, severe anxiety. Oh my goodness. Suicide is a far greater risk to the seafarers than COVID-19 is. Physical health on board. They have, some ships actually have gymnasiums or small areas for working out and a few pieces of equipment. They're afraid to use it because they don't want to be in the same room with each other. They're afraid to be in the same room with each other. And yet they're all isolating together. Social life on board is therefore compromised. They're afraid to associate because of the fear of the virus. If any of them being off the ship, they have to isolate. If they're a new crew member, when they come on board, they have to isolate for 2 weeks on board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Their economic well-being is always at the front of their consciousness. Is this going to last? How many more days or weeks will we be employed? Is my family getting our money, et cetera, et cetera? One survey said their biggest fear is that they have been forgotten by the world, forgotten by the people who they care for. 90% of everything gets here because they keep working. And that they are not being named key or essential workers in many countries, and that includes the United States. There are a few ports in the United States where seafarers have been named essential workers or key workers. Canada, the government of Canada, has named seafarers essential workers. And there is no respect for seafarers' human rights. COVID-19, or let me jump back, the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, has legislation, the Marine Labor Convention 2006, which requires countries to have a National Seafarers Welfare Board. It is 2020. The legislation was initiated in 2006, signed in 2012 by Canada, one of the first signatories. Has never been signed again by the United States. And it took a pandemic to get us to put this together. So we are very proud of the fact that we now have a National Seafarers Welfare Board on which Mission to Seafarers and the other seafarer welfare societies, Canadian representatives are on this board. And we are fighting every day, and will be again tomorrow, for respect for human rights. This is a picture of a couple of the cruise ships anchored off Nassau. One of the seafarers on one ship needed to get some medical help, and they had to go to Miami by launch. As you can see, the little launches here. They had to go to Miami to get that help because the Bahamas wouldn't allow them shore leave. How many seafarers remain on board? The CDC said last month about 80,000 crew members remained on board ships off the US coast. That's just the US coast. But there's no way to know exactly how many crew members remain on board because people are not, ship companies especially, they're not forthcoming about this. Most of the crews that are left on board are from cruise ships. The estimates put the total at between 300,000 and 500,000 remain on board today. Many crew members on commercial vessels have also had their contracts extended arbitrarily. A normal contract is between 9 and 11 months. Many seafarers have been on board for up to 18, 19, and now 20 months, having been told month after month they will be going home at some point. They are afraid to complain. We've had this problem too. They complain to us that they were told they were getting off in Montreal, but they aren't. They have not been given any details that they can give to their families. They came to us asking us if we could help with the details. We got in touch with the ITF. The ITF said to us, unless they get in touch with them, they can't do anything. They can't do anything on our say so. They have to get in touch directly. The seafarers have to make that approach themselves. Because in the meantime, the ship may get to Montreal, the ITF will go on board and say, what do we hear here? You are not letting these people home. And they'll just show a whole bunch of new contracts. Oh, well, they just signed new contracts. Everything's fine. So there's a lot of issues, a lot of underhandedness that's happening with seafarers. Their human rights are being violated, and they're terrified to complain. What is our response as Mission to Seafarers to the mission in Canada? These two photographs, I love these photos. This was shortly after, this was just in July. Shore leave became official in July, and they were allowed to get off the ship and stand on the dock for the first time since March. We have ships that the people haven't been able to actually get off the ship for months at a time. These folks are in Halifax. Tim Hortons delivered a huge shipment of donuts, as you can see, and seafarers love their donuts, let me tell you. And the bags on the other side are bags full of gently used clothing, and again, more boxes of Tim Hortons that were delivered to the ship. These folks hadn't been off for months, and they were over the moon. They were going to get to change their clothes. We are doing as much as we can to help them and give them the knowledge that they're not forgotten, that they're not invisible, that we know who they are. And that's why things like the hand knitted hats, people think, are you still doing that? Why would you bother? What's the deal? We give these guys a ditty bag. The first thing they do at Christmas, they open the bag, they look for the scarf, they look for the hat. Somebody's hand knitted those items without knowing who was going to get them, but they knitted them for a seafarer they didn't know by hand as a gift. The seafarer feels a connection with another human being's hands when they touch the hat, when they wrap the scarf around them. It's like having that person hug them. That is a huge, huge thing. That is why those hats are so important. Mission of Seafarers UK, in conjunction with ICMA, the International Christian Maritime Association, have a 24/7 access for seafarers and their families online around the world, something called Chat to a Chaplain. Families also pick it up and connect in with Chat to a Chaplain, which is how we found out about the woman trying to get our help to have her husband's remains repatriated. They are talking about every item under the sun as of, I think, May, they had connected with over 800 people and had approximately 500 cases that were actively being worked on around the world. The Mission Family Service Networks in the Philippines and in India to grow and support more seafaring families living in vulnerable communities. These communities, while they have ships coming into their ports, the majority of people are actually leaving. So it is their families left behind who need the help and assistance and support, not getting their husbands' money, not knowing where their husbands and sons and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles are. The family service networks in India and in the Philippines have little centers all over the place that people can get help at, families can get help at, and it's essential to them. In Canada, the Mission to Seafarers is represented on the National Seafarers Welfare Board, along with Transport Canada, North American Maritime Ministry Association, International Longshoremen's Union, Association of Canadian Port Authorities, Stella Maris, Ministry for Seafarers, Christian Reformed Church, Lighthouse Ministries in Vancouver, the ITF, International Transport Federation, International Chamber of Shipping, among many other organizations, and they are all dedicated to the health and welfare of seafarers, both domestic and foreign. And this board is mandated, as I said earlier, by the IMO's Maritime Labor Convention 2006, of which Canada is a signatory. We have approximately 200 mission stations around the world with the Mission to Seafarers in 120 different ports. Mission to Seafarers provide a home away from home, as many of you know. In Hamilton, the mission station is open, and in Oshawa, the mission station is open. The Seafarers have made use of that from time to time in the last couple of months. Wi-Fi is always free, but we also sell SIM cards and top-up cards, so we're doing a land office business in that, although we sell it at a loss. We offer, as you saw in the photo, gently used clothing offered free. They love that. They absolutely love it. And we have packed, we will pack and distribute approximately 600 ditty bags, actually closer to 700 ditty bags now that I think about it. We had a huge packing day last week and started giving packages out on Friday evening to the ships that were in Toronto and Hamilton. One of the ships in Oshawa, who was on its way to Hamilton now, she's on her way to Hamilton. The captain put in a request for our team to pick up a bingo game. And one of our board members, her company bought 25 games to give out to the ships when they come into port per ship, something to encourage the seafarers to get together. And one of them was a bingo game. And she said to me, was that a dumb idea? So I got in touch with our team in Hamilton and said, I'm putting a lock on that game. When the ship gets in, make sure that it goes onto this federal ship, because the captain needs it, and we couldn't buy one in Oshawa. So stuff like that is so hugely important. By the way, we give out gifts to everybody. We don't walk up to them and say, oh, which one of you are Christians and which one aren't? My favorite story was one of my parishioners a few years ago at the Lutheran church I was serving wanted to come with me when I was giving out Christmas gifts. Bought a hard hat and a pair of steel-toed boots for the occasion. At 7 o'clock in the morning, we climbed up the gangway of this ship in Hamilton. It was discharging its cargo and had to be out of the port by about 5 o'clock that evening. So we had to get there early. We're climbing up the gangway, and the guy on the watch asked us who we were. We told him Seamen's Club with ditty bags. And he starts yelling into his walkie-talkie on his shoulder, Christmas is here, Christmas is here. And they're all running down to the gangway, and they're all jumping up and down and slapping each other on the back and, high-fiving us. And they're all so excited. And every single person on that ship was Hindu. He said, we thought you forgot us. Oh my God, that breaks my heart. We never forget them. It doesn't matter who they are, what their culture is, where they're from, who they worship, or if they worship anybody at all. We want them to remember we remember them. During COVID, we have been doing a lot of shopping because they can't get off the ship, but we're buying everything that they need. And since March, when lockdown began in Canada, it's estimated that mission teams around our country have purchased over $1 million of goods for visiting foreign ships, including food, clothing, electronic goods, new phones, antennas. You would not believe some of the requests we have, including a bingo game. This has also added a whole layer of stress on us at the mission, because we've had to sort of pivot in our own jobs, doing as much pastoral care as we can at a distance. And part of that is the shopping. Our senior chaplain in Hamilton believes that the crews don't give us a full list every day because they want us to come back every day while they're in town, just to see us, to have that connection. And we've had some remarkable conversations with them at the foot of the gangway. And so, time for questions. These folks were very excited to get ditty bags. As you can see, they don't have masks on. This is not a current picture. I will thank you for your support, and I will stop sharing this now. And if there are any questions, I would be very happy to take them from you. And thank you very much for your time.
So I just put the slide up to explain how you can raise your virtual Zoom hand so we can take the questions in order. Diane, do you want to go ahead?
I do. Judith, I really want to thank you for this. I knew a lot about what you were speaking, but the extent of it is horrifying.
It's shocking. Thank you, Diane.
And I guess my question is what can we as individuals do to help? I heard several things in what you were talking about. One was the knitting of mitts and hats and scarves, and donating used clothing, and and packing the ditty bags, perhaps helping with that.
We have done all the ditty bags. They're all packed, and we are actually in the process of delivering them.
Can we help there?
Well, actually, the problem is you can't, because you have to have security passes to get into the ports, and you also have to, so that clearance takes weeks to get, unfortunately. But providing us with the stuff that goes in the bags, that's really important. For example, they love chocolate. Those big bags that you can get at Costco, Swiss chocolate with the little chocolate bars in them.
Mm-hmm.
I bought 36 for the ship that was in Toronto a week and a half ago. I sold 30. They asked for 3, and I thought, nah, these guys they're gonna see this and they're gonna go crazy. And I bought 3. The 6 that I had left over, those went into, we broke them open and put them in ditty bags. But we always need stuff like that: hats, scarves, gloves, socks, soap, toothpaste, toothbrushes, razor blades, stuff like that. We're always very, very happy to get that. Certainly money, that helps us because we go out and buy in bulk as well. And it also helps us just keep the mission afloat. Our donations this year from corporate groups have been down quite significantly, but stuff to go in those bags, yes, very much so, Diane. The packing is stuff that we have to do because we have our systems and we have everything set up in the mission. We had 6 people help on Friday. A couple of board members, our wonderful board members came in, including our president, and a couple of volunteers that showed up a couple of years ago and found out about it and came in. But most people were reluctant because they're afraid to, we don't want to do this in a group. So it took 4 hours and we packed 430 bags. Then I had a telephone call yesterday from a person I shall call our secret Santa, and he is delivering 200 more bags next week.
Okay, James, go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I was wondering what percentage of the ships on the Great Lakes stay in Canada, and what's the crew distribution on those?
Well, there are 2 kinds of ships on the Great Lakes, Jim. Thank you for your question. Salties and the Lakers. The Lakers, they will stay at or near the lake. So they'll either be overwintering here or throughout the seaway up as far as Thunder Bay. The salties, I would say 99% are out of the lake between the 24th and the 31st of December, because the seaway shuts down because it freezes up. So they have to leave, and because they're foreign going, they are going overseas. You know, a lot of them are heading to Europe after they leave the lakes. A lot of them are going up to Thunder Bay, picking up grain, and then heading to Italy.
Okay.
So you're saying that there are very few of the Lakers that stay on the Great Lakes.
Well, some Lakers are actually going overseas. I don't know what the percentage is that stay specifically. We usually have 3 or 4 in Toronto, but they're you know, down in St. Catharines, Port Weller, and some of them are ocean going as well. So they get the bigger Algoma Equinox class also sail on the oceans. So, but I don't know what the percentage is.
So it's a small number, probably.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Sorry.
Spence and Linda, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. We
Oh.
have no idea all is done behind the scenes. But where can you leave donations if you have something to drop off?
I'm in Toronto. You can always let me know if you have a donation, and we can connect up. If you send me an email, my email address is Diane glutenfreepriest@gmail.com. Maybe you could put that out to folks, and we can connect directly and then make arrangements. Unfortunately, we don't have a big station any longer the way we used to, and people could drive by and drop stuff off at the mission. The building sadly was demolished a year and a half ago after a flood. So I do have a small office, but it's probably easier to just connect with me, and we can arrange pickup or delivery. If you're out in Oshawa, we do have a station in Oshawa, and we have volunteers there. And if you're in Hamilton, we have direct access to the Hamilton mission, which is located at 651 Burlington, just west of Sherman.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Liz, go ahead, unmute yourself. Liz, you need to unmute yourself.
Graham?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's extraordinary presentation. It just gives
Thank you.
so much to think about. It's very unsettling. But as I said, you know, something to contemplate, because the story is so vast. But my question, I have 2 questions. I know crew often worry about how money they earn gets to family.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know, how do they get paid? And if they're on board offshore, only the crew aboard a ship, for weeks and weeks and weeks, are they still being paid?
That's a very, very good question, Liz. Thank you for asking that. Some are and some aren't. We had a ship come ashore after about 3 months. They were not paid anything in those 3 months, and then they got to shore and they were given a bulk payment. We had to transfer the money home to their homes using a number of banks and transfer facilities. Because of the money laundering laws in Canada, we could only transfer X number of dollars. That was an unusual circumstance there in a shipping company that's not my favorite, shall we say. There are other companies where the seafarers are given X number of dollars and 50% automatically gets transferred to their families. They don't even see that. It just goes. So their families are immediately paid while they're at sea. They are supposed to be paid for every day's work while they are at sea. That is what a contract is for. Some of the contract extensions have some of the companies have cut their pay, made changes to their income, all kinds of things. It's different everywhere. Most of the really good shipping companies, they are very careful about this. They ensure that their crews are treated very, very well, and we're very happy to work with them. And they keep us well informed, as well as keeping their crew well informed. So there's a sort of a gamut of payment. For example, a few years ago, I took a training course in the Philippines. There is a whole department in the Philippine government regarding, and it's the Overseas Philippine Workers, the OFWs. They all, we had no idea what this was. The OFWs provide the Philippine government with 35% of their GDP every year, because they send their money home in remittances to the government. It's like a tax, 35% of the GDP. That's shocking. And because the Philippines' greatest export is their people, nannies, seafarers, nurses, PSWs, there's a lot of money going into the country that way. How it gets there, there are so many ways it does, but it's just, I mean, it's terrible that COVID has happened, but it is bringing to light so many issues that we have been struggling with, to bring awareness to people for so many years now, that people are now starting to pay attention. And we're very happy that that's happening. We're sad of how and why it's happening, but we are glad that people like yourselves all over the country are paying attention and supporting and helping. And there are a number of you in this room today who have supported the mission for a number of years. You know who you are, and you know I know who you are, and I want to thank you on their behalf. We could not do this without you. You partner with us with all the support that you give us.
Spence and Linda, go ahead with your question. Unmute yourself.
Can you tell us the names of some of the good shipping companies?
Oh gosh, yeah. Algoma Shipping, our board president, Captain Jim Pound, who's here today. He was a captain with Algoma. The Canadian shipping companies are pretty darn good. Federal Navigation, which is a Canadian-based international shipping company, they're very, very good. They're a strict company where their staff and their crew are concerned, but it's like being a good parent as opposed to just, putting the hammer down. They want to make sure that their people are taken care of. They're a very good company. CSL is another international and Canadian and international shipping company. They're wonderful. Those are the ones that I'm very familiar with in terms of the good ones, and thankfully they're all Canadian. There are a few others, but I'd really rather not name them, who are not our favorite. And a lot of the intervention on behalf of the Seafarers Welfare Board and the members of the Welfare Board is helping to bring changes about to those companies and how they treat their seafarers. So it's part of the work that we do as well.
Good.
Seamus, go ahead and mute yourself and ask your question.
Myself? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Seamus.
Okay, sorry to interrupt if I did earlier.
No.
I sometimes get a thing on my screen, your network bandwidth is low, whatever that means.
Yeah, I get that too.
I'll try and be as brief as I can. First of all, my head is going for names these days. Judith, I do thank you for your excellent presentation, which is the result of many things, including magnificent research. Have you been interviewed by any of our main mass media stations like CBC, CTV, etc.?
Not for a while.
Sorry, go ahead.
Not for a while. I have been interviewed a few times by the Globe and Mail, and participated in the CBC program Tapestry in 2016. But
I know the program.
yeah, we haven't been interviewed lately.
Okay, well, I'm talking particularly for television. I think what you have presented us with today, I'm not involved in the media, but this is excellent
Thank you.
presentation, and particularly with regard to this region of Canada with the Great Lakes, etc. That was very interesting information. And I will say that your presentation today, I thought I knew a lot of things. There are a lot of things I didn't know until you told us today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Judith, I have a question. So when
Yes.
it comes to the vaccines, are they going to be sort of left out at the end because they're not really under anybody's jurisdiction and everybody's going to pass the buck?
That is a question I do not know the answer for. I believe that will the vaccines will be distributed through the respective companies, but that's a really good question, Graham, and I am going to follow up on that because now that it is happening in the UK and will be happening in Canada soon, I think that's extremely important. And because of the nature of their work, as I said, we've declared them to be key workers in Canada, then they should have access to the vaccines the same way, ambulance drivers, firefighters, doctors, nurses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a good question, and I will let you know.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
We have a website, mtsso.org is the Mission to Seafarers Southern Ontario website. If you are inclined to make a donation, we do have a donor button with Canada Helps on that website. If you go to the international website, you're donating to England, and you'll be giving them pounds sterling, which is, I don't think, what you want to do. So mtsso.org is our website. And
Judith, would you just do that alphabetically? Is that
Mission to Seafarers Southern Ontario, so it's the initials,
okay.
MTSSO.
Thank you. Thank you. I will send
.org.
I will send that out with the other the phone
Thanks,
numbers and
thanks,
whatnot.
Graham. We also have a Facebook page, Mission to Seafarers Southern Ont. And that just has general information, photographs, seafarers connecting in and out.
Okay. Any last call for any questions?
I've gone over time and I do apologize for that. Thank you all so much for your patience and for listening and for your questions and your support. It means everything to us, truly.
Judith, this is Nick here. I have one question, and I again want to thank you very much for your very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
I was curious about one thing. So far, we haven't heard anything from the provincial government or the federal government, seeing that the seafarers are, going up and down the lakes and the seaway are so important to our economy and our well-being. Is there any push to go into the political provincial members to ask for assistance for the seafarer building to be rebuilt, and also some support for these seafarers that are, in this dire strait?
Those are wonderful questions, and thank you for asking them, Nick. The provincial government has not had any input into our work at all. I've never really connected with the provincial government outside of Oshawa, which was a couple of years ago as we were trying to get the Oshawa station underway, but not really any financial support. And it was at the federal level. At the federal level, Transport Canada is the instigator of the National Seafarers Welfare Board, which is, we're having a monthly meeting and it's tomorrow, vital importance. So nationally they are involved, provincially they are not. Good point though, because most of the seaway or highway H2O as they call it is in Ontario, Lake Ontario through the lakes up to the Lake Superior. It's, 99% of it is in Ontario, but the provincial government doesn't have any direct involvement. Ministry of Transport is really covering mostly highways from my perspective, but nobody has contacted us directly. But Transport Canada, we are very, very involved with.
One more call. If there are any more questions, please raise your virtual Zoom hand.
And please feel free to email me with any other questions. I'm happy to answer or find answers for you.
Okay, Judith, once again, thank you so much for that detailed and well-researched presentation.
You're very welcome. It was an honor, really. Thank you.
Well, you're speaking for so many people, and I think what you're doing is incredible. As I mentioned earlier, Shellbacks will be making a donation to you shortly, and I encourage individual donations as well. I have to admit I haven't before, but I will this year. Your service is so needed for so many people, including all of us, because of whom you are affecting. So a big warm thank you for you, Judith, and for the mission to Seafarers. Let's just give her a nice silent round of applause here.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
It's our absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm so glad you were able to do that. And so we are moving towards a break now, and our next session will be in January the 6th. Ron Jenkins will continue his fascinating presentation on the history of Toronto Harbor.
Excellent.
With the story of the Toronto Portlands, part 1. So he's going to look at what's happening with the Portlands. Started as one of the largest wetlands on the North Shore of Lake Ontario. I'm sorry, my eyes are blurring and I'm not supposed to put glasses on, but we are putting glasses on. Okay, that's a little bit better. Over the decades, the Portlands have been the site of a series of massive changes that continue to this day. In this first of 2 talks on the Portlands, Ron will start with the area's early history and trace the changes up to the present. The second talk, which will happen in March or April, will extend the story into the future, delineating the civic planning vision for the next few decades. And following that, on January 13th, Francis Clegg, president of the Briggs, formerly the Toronto Brigantine, gives us an exciting update of the activities of the Briggs program and a peek into the future. And with that, I would like to wish you all a safe and healthy holiday and look forward to seeing you in January. Pipes out.